The Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: EliteForm.com, IgnitionAPG.com, PlayUSA at PLAEUSA.com, and Sorinex Exercise Equipment at Sorinex.com. And now, the Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast. Welcome to Iron Game Chalk Talk with your host, Ron McKeefery.
Every time our athletes walk into this weight room, they're going to be pushed to the max.
Let's go! Everything you got!
On this podcast, hear Coach McKeefery straight talk about training, featuring the top strength and conditioning professionals from around the world. And now, here's your host, Ron McKeefery.
Hey guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery, and this is episode number 172. Excited to have Joe Quinlin with us today. Joe's the head strength coach there. He's been there for quite some time. First as an athlete, won a national championship as an athlete there. You know, got out, went away, went to West Virginia. Kind of worked in the performance world, and then came back as the head strength coach, where I think they've won 3 national championships over the time that he's been there in football and had tons of success in the other sports. And wanted to have him on the show. It came recommended to me from a couple of different people. Pours into his staff, his former staff members, well, some of the guys that recommended him, and tons of success. Pours into his people. Has a great situation there at Northwest Missouri State. It's a place that I grew up around. Actually, I grew up going to 7-on-7 tournaments there. When I was young, and they've done a great job of building that program up with the resources that they have. You know, we talk about that. We talk about the limited resources. We talk about limited staff, and how he balances that out with 15 plus sports and the whole deal. So there's tons of great information in this episode. Before we get to that, though, we want to recognize our sponsor for the show, Elite Form. Elite Form does a fantastic job. Skip and everybody out there have become close friends through the years, and this is a product that when I first saw, I thought was an instant game changer, and it's proved to be that. The technology is far superior than what's out there. But if you're tracking velocity, you're tracking power output, this does it in a 3-dimensional camera, and again, where the technology can go, they're just scratching the surface. And so if you're in the market for that, I would make sure to check out Elite Form. If you haven't followed them on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, make sure to do so. But just great people doing some phenomenal things. Just a technology company based in Lincoln, Nebraska, but they got their pulse on the industry and making sure that they're staying ahead of the curve. And so check them out, EliteForm.com, and I know that you'll find it just as interesting as I do. Sit back and enjoy this episode, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. Excited to have Joe Quinlin with us. Joe is the head strength coach at Northwest Missouri State, and for those of you that don't know, I grew up in Kansas City and had attended several 7-on-7 tournaments and things like that at Northwest Missouri State. And if you're from that area, you know the success that program's had, and Joe's been there as a player, as a coach, and has continued that success. And so, man, I'm excited to have you on the show, brother.
Appreciate having me.
Joe, talk a little bit about that history now. I mean, it's not often that you get a chance to, to play at a high level. You won, 2 national championships as a player, right? And then turn around and go into coaching and maintain that success there at the same school you played at, where I think you've won 2 or 3 national championships as a coach, right?
3 as a coach, so yeah.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I came in 1996 as a walk-on, so I kind of worked my way up the ranks that way anyway. So coming in, our program, 94, we were 0-11. Coach Churchman came in and really changed the culture. So for me, I got in here 2 years after they kind of turned it around, kind of got in on better years at least. So, but it was tough at first, but they had a good thing going. The coaches believed that we were going to turn it around. And so graduated 2000. We won 98, 99, 2000 graduated. Went to West Virginia for grad school. Didn't do too much in the strength and conditioning there. I thought I was going to be a personal trainer for a while. Went there, got my master's, taught some classes, and coached high school football. And then came back. My wife is the head athletic trainer here now, but she got offered the job as assistant athletic trainer. Came back to Maryville and started youth camps around this area, coached high school football, and just personal trained. Then the opportunity came open to come back here, which very rare for me and my wife both. Before we're 30 years old, we were both back at our alma mater doing exactly what we went to school for, and loving every minute of it. So as a coach, it's different for me because you kind of get to as a player, and, I kind of bleed green pretty deep. So it kind of really falls into place as far as what this tradition means to me and what they started back when Coach Churchman took over. So it's been a journey, but, the last couple of years, obviously trying to maintain that high standard, it's very challenging year in, year out, kind of get those freshmen broke in and kind of believe in what we have going. It's challenging, but, I love every day. So.
Oh, that's awesome, man. There's lots to dig into there. I always like to kind of go back through the person's journey. And one of the things that I always talk to young coaches about is when you're reaching out and you're talking to, experienced veteran coaches,
Mm-hmm.
the best question you ask them is what's one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made and how they learn from it, and as going from being a player, into the personal training ranks, back into coaching now, there's quite a bit of a difference between playing and coaching, and obviously personal training and coaching at the highest level there. So talk about maybe one of the biggest mistakes you made with your athletes and then how you learned from that.
Yeah, well, the biggest one I'd say is I kind of always, obviously numbers are important strength-wise, but we'd always kind of gear towards the end of summer, and that last week before camp would start is our max out week, where it was just really challenging because we're focusing on that, pushing those big weights and getting the rep, our max really, really high. So for me, my biggest mistake was that second year I was here, 2009, we had 11 hamstring injuries that first week of camp. And I was like, I tried to figure out what I do wrong. And I felt like I kind of just was all pushing towards the numbers rather than getting them ready for their next stage of the season, which is camp, which for us, they rarely have a day off. It's day in, day out, 2 days. And then on their single, they come in and lift with me once. So I kind of tailored back to where and it's a different philosophy. I kind of started with conjugate and went towards more West Side for Skinny Bastards and kind of went to 3-day a week. And active recovery was more a part of my program. And for me, weights were important, and, we wanted to make those gains, but making sure we're ready for that next stage. So for me, I kind of got into where I'm running more and doing conditioning to be able to be on the field rather than just pushing those big numbers, and coach looks at them, but if they're not on the field playing after that first week, they're all defense, all right hamstring. It was weird. So we kind of tailored back to where it was more run-based, but also building to projected maxes, but not our focus towards the end of summer. So that was probably my biggest one as a football strength coach. Other ones, just dealing with female athletes and then working with my GAs to work with coaches are another one too. So
yeah, no, that's I think every coach goes through that progression, and at the end of the day, you're right. I mean, they look like Tarzan, but they're sitting on the sideline. It doesn't do anybody any good.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about your wife being the head athletic trainer there as well, and it's always one of those topics that we discuss on the show. About the strength coach athletic trainer relationship. Obviously, if you piss her off too bad, you're going to go home and you're going to hear it for the entire night.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about being on the other side, hearing being able to go home and have a conversation with your wife about her day. And some of the things, maybe some of the advice that you would have for strength coaches that to have a better relationship with their head athletic trainer.
I think it's very vital for me, and obviously my wife. When we get home, we got 3 kids. We have one on the way, which is chaotic in itself. So, but for us to really sit down at home, our first half hour that she's home, we're talking about injuries, and it's a great thing, and I know. It is very rare, but that communication where that next day when we come into weights, we know exactly what's going on with them. But I would strongly assure you on the same kid, athletic training department, and kind of get in tune with what they're trying to do, and making. I'd really try to at least bridge that gap with them. For us, obviously, it does affect home if if all of a sudden the kid gets injured that shouldn't be lifting at all. But we have a strong connection there. But I think it's vital for our athletes to know that the best interest of them is what we're trying to do. And it is very humbling. And I say my wife is, and anybody that knows my wife she's 10 times, maybe 100 times smarter than I am. So when she says something and a kid doesn't listen or I mess up, it is a setback there. But you kind of have to humble yourself because you feel like you have what's right for them. But, she has some great ideas. We sit down and talk stuff through. And, sometimes I am right where we can kind of change and adjust programming for a kid return to play. But we have a great return to play protocol for ACL, shoulders, ankle sprains, where we have a HyperWorks pool. We get them in there. We have a forced treadmill. We kind of return them that way. Then they return to the field. So setting that up with your athletic trainer and making sure the kids understand why you're doing what you're doing. Perfect example, we have a kid right now who's coming off a hamstring. We had our scrimmage here about 3 days ago where we had to cut him back and, say, well, this is our, in a week from now, we're looking for you to play. It's not about you playing in the scrimmage, and kind of showing that, both Kelly and I have the same interest that we want him to be back on the field as soon as possible, not just out there practicing. So,
absolutely. Being at a smaller school, Division II school, still big time football, big time university, but staffing and resources and things along those lines might not be what they are in the SEC or the Pac-12 or whatever it may be. Talk about how you've been able to grow that program, while maybe not getting the resources that you need, and what are some of the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis, and how you've dealt with those.
Yeah, challenges are obviously money is the big one. For us, recovery-wise, we have a contract with Gatorade now that's really built over the years. We have fuel bars, those type of things that really come into play. We have a Gatorade dispenser and post-workout Gatorade mix. So that's been huge for us because if kids aren't on meal plans, we don't have the meal plan for every kid, especially if they're off campus. At least we're getting something back in their body. I have no assistants. I have 2 graduate assistants, and we started an internship program a couple of years back. A couple of my graduate assistants really helped me with that. But that's how we kind of built it. Is our internship program is my feeder for my graduate assistant program, and getting some of these young kids, maybe a player that might play football or basketball or track that after a year doesn't like it, but they like to be in the weight room. I can pick through those kids and see which ones would be great coaches, and then build them over the years. They start cleaning, then we start them with teams, and we pair them up with teams and go from there. But my graduate assistants, they are my assistant coaches. They have teams, and so I'm not. The toughest thing for that is every 2 years I have to reteach somebody. But right. It's nice to kind of get those kids out there and see them be successful. I've had pretty good success with those graduate assistants going on and getting D1 or high school jobs in the field. So it's good for them because they get hands-on. The other thing is I make them deal with coaches and issues. Like I'll oversee it, obviously, but I want them to have that firsthand where I'm not overseeing everything. That early on, obviously, we do programs. I make sure their programs are they can defend their program to me. And then I kind of give them free reign, to talk to coaches and make sure our conditioning's up on some of those sports my graduate assistants have. So even though I don't have, full-time assistants, those guys are there, then our interns kind of pick up the slack and do a lot of the other smaller things. But space-wise, we have 2,000 square foot in our weight room, and then right outside our weight room, we have a warm-up area with hurdles and open area that's 2,000 square foot. And then, it's a split level to our football field, and the top level would be our basketball arena where we have prowlers and sleds up there. So spacing-wise, we have exactly what we need. It might not always be the newest thing, but they still got to work, they still got to push the weight, and they still got to get stronger somehow. So it's not always about the, nice facility and everything looking pretty. I kind of like it to where we need it to be a little rusty and a little old that, dig down deep and push some stuff and challenge those kids that way.
No doubt. My first weight room, as a head strength coach in South Florida, we had a 1,300, 1,500 square foot weight room that we won a lot of ball games in. And Sometimes I miss that weight room, having that. You talked a little bit in there about that. I think you made a great point. I don't want people to miss it. Is letting the young coaches have to deal with the relationships of coaches, of athletes, and having to go through that experience. That's the hardest part, I think, sometimes for coaches, is being able to manage people. And, you haven't done that. What are some of the things that you do to help put them in a place to be successful in those situations? Are you doing any kind of mock test, mock training? Are you doing, what's your training process look? Because you have 2 GAs, 15 plus sports, so many times, so many of these situations, coaches just throw them out to the wolves and say, here you go. You said you have them defend your program, but how are they even knowing how to put that program together in the first place?
For our interns, like I said, I'm more of a conjugate type in the West Side, and we kind of build into have bits and pieces of about every, even triphasic a little bit in there, but I like them to have their own belief system on what they like to train. Our baseball team was all APRE last year and kind of changed stuff up. But I want them to train. I don't want them to do my program. I want them to create a program. So first, we go over all the different types of, training philosophies, and they can kind of choose and pick. A lot of them come from a different program where I have a guy now that's more of a tier guy. He teaches me stuff, and I just kind of ask him stuff. So I want them to kind of pick what program they'd like and then go with it and make sure they're sticking with it. But for athletes, it is kind of a challenge. Every 2 years they might change out a little bit. But I want that strength coach to be bought into what they're doing rather than going and doing my program and not believing in it. You can really tell a coach when they don't believe in a program. I don't feel like push their kids as well as they should. So we'll sit down, we teach them all these different types of philosophies and let them choose, and then they write mock programs, and I kind of will pick them apart, and it puts them more in an intern, like if you're interviewing for a job, very similar to that, where I'll say, why'd you do this? What if you have a kid that has this type of injury, and then they can modify it on their own and they know exactly what they're doing. If they have an issue with the coach or a player, usually I just have them come in and talk to me, and we'll go through it and make sure they're good with, when you go to, defend it. And I say, it's like you're in a court of law. If you're going to go in there and, MF a kid and tell him, he's stupid, well, that's not the best way to probably handle some of these situations. You got to pull them away from the group, talk to them a little bit. Same as coaches, you got to go in and say, this is what happened, this is what I'd like to do, and get their approval to go ahead with, having them come in and clean the weight room early, or having them come in and on off time and do some extra conditioning to make up for missing times and stuff like that. So I'll sit down and go one-on-one with each situation, but, they got to understand they're going to have to sit in front of that coach, and that's their judge, and be able to defend why they're doing what they're doing. But the good thing for us is our coaches all have really bought into what we have going. I don't have any coaches that really push me hard to say, why are we doing this when we're doing this on the field? And the other thing I like to get my GAs to understand is what they're doing at practice, and going and watching practice, because, basketball, they're jumping, volleyball, we're jumping all over the place, and we have, low-level plyos or high-level plyos that same day. And the wear and tear on the body is one thing that, again, we don't really control what they eat and recover. So we got to make sure we're limiting the pounding on some of those things too. So
we were talking off camera a little bit about high school coaches coming in and visiting, and how you feel like you might be able to relate more to them than maybe the Alabamas of the world. Talk a little bit about the advice that you typically give those high school coaches when they come and spend time with you in the weight room.
Yeah, a lot of it, I tell them to simplify their program as much as possible, and just believe in what you're doing. I mean, I will give coaches what I do for lifting, but I say I set up my program based on my weight room. You can take it and probably use it, but I guarantee technique-wise and why you're doing at certain times of the year this instead of this, they have no idea. So I tell them I'd rather write a program and send it to me, and I check over it real quick and kind of work that way. The other thing is my budget. I go through mostly a booster group. Most of my budget is spent on reconditioning old equipment, getting med balls that bust up, stuff like that. So I understand a lot of those high school issues where, I don't have, even $10,000. I don't even have close to that for budgeting, but I can go to our boosters and say, this is something we need for all sports, kind of builds through that. And a lot of our high school coaches kind of feel with that too. But programming wise, the simpler, the better, as long as you're getting good movements and understanding. I want them to still be great at their sport. A lot of high school coaches will put it to where it might be a football coach in the weight room where they're all geared up to Friday night. All of a sudden, they're taking off the weight on Friday morning where, volleyball might have a match on a Wednesday and then they're squatting heavy on that day. So understand what sports you're working with. But I'd tell any high school coach, go into a local college, anybody. You can get anybody my information. Send me a program and tell me what you want out of it. But I will sit down with every high school coach and show them why I do what I do and kind of hopefully decrease those injuries and keep our players on the field for us. It's a little different, like I say, with football for us is we go from camp to right into conference. So we have 11 straight weeks of conference. If we win out, we have a bye week, and then we have 4 weeks of playoffs. So 15 out of 16 weeks, it's a grind. So I got to make sure, I can do different adjustments on the fly and kind of take weight off and kind of, undulate the training process a little bit. But for a high school coach, I think they fall into that too, where a kid goes from, a football right into a basketball.
Right.
So we want to make sure that it's more for the athlete. It's not about pushing weights all the time. It's about getting them ready for their sport and being successful at their sport. So
you mentioned in there going to the booster club for equipment and things along those lines. How did you set that relationship up and kind of what's that process look like?
For me, the head of the boosters, he's our assistant athletic director. I'll go in and I already have stuff probably 2 or 3 months out that I need. But I'll send it to them and say, this is what I'm looking for. Is this something that's in the budget? And they'll kind of give me approval of what it will be. And then I'll go in. It's I think the third Thursday or something of every month and go meet with them and just talk about why I'm getting it. And they'll ask me questions, but I try to get it to where it's going to help all sports. But that's one of the big things that even though our football program or our basketball program have been our bigger programs lately, my goal is to bring our second, tier sports up too. So we try to get, med balls or sledgehammers we just got here recently. We got some smaller ones for our female athletes. I want them to do a lot of those things too. But it really helps to go to the boosters with a plan to say, this is going to help all of our athletic sports, not just football. And it kind of pushed that way. But I kind of will go do some research. The other thing I'd say for high school coaches too is we have some welders in town that make some of our sleds and prowlers, and it's not just the cost of the equipment, it's the shipping.
Right.
And we've had, we save thousands of dollars on prowlers or sleds, or we just got some new kind of plate holders made local with wheels and really nice high-level ones that would cost probably 4 times as much plus shipping. But look around and see what you have, especially, for us, we have enough farmers around this area that you can usually find somebody who could weld something pretty quick for you. But and even on campus, we have some welders that can do some jobs for us to really save money on that end of it.
No, that's great advice. You've been at the school since, you said, 2008 or 2006 as a coach?
2008.
Yeah, 2008 as a coach. So you've been there quite some time, and with all the winning and all the success, I'm sure there's been opportunities. Obviously, your wife's entrenched there, you're entrenched there, things along those lines. But I'm sure there's been a party that's maybe thought about going on and things like that. One of the things we always talk about on the show is making the big time where you're at, and you've done that. You've made this a situation where it's hard to leave. It's hard to it's those jobs, they're not as appealing just because they're more money or maybe a better location or whatever. You've really made this a job that it's hard to leave. What advice would you have for coaches, that are going in this profession that want to just plant a flag and stay in one place?
I would say do it. My thing is, obviously you have the D1 dream, stuff like that. But for me, Maryville is 2 hours from Omaha, 2.5 from Des Moines, and about an hour 15 from Kansas City, kind of in the middle of all these places. I have family, Central Iowa. And those things at my age, I'm 38 now, that are kind of a little more meaningful. And obviously, money, you always want more money. But, we have a great life. We have a great house. We're all healthy. And I love, like I said, in my situation, where if I'd go to a Division I, I'd have to be an assistant and probably, do somebody else's program. And that's what I tell all my GAs is you could go to D1 and probably be an assistant for a long time and kind of work your way up. But if you really want to try something, going into a smaller program or a high school setting and develop your own program on your own and really challenge yourself with those. But I love it. I mean, the stress level is still there. I mean, believe it or not, like even though we're D2, there's still a lot of stress that goes along with everything. Because I mean, the whole goal is to win at every sport. So that's not going to change at all. But my hours, we're still 7 days a week right now during football season with travel and doing things like that. But my, summers are still jam-packed. It's not like I'm buying a lot of time there. But, I feel, it's not always that big name on your shirt that makes you important. And one of my former GAs is at a Division I now. He doesn't like wearing his D1 shirt when he goes to any conferences because people will look at your shirt and then they decide to talk to you. Where it's more about learning. There's been a lot of great strength coaches that I've learned from the high school level all the way up to the college level. But sometimes that name on your shirt kind of blocks people from even contacting and talking to you. So I can't remember my question, but I got around to it a little bit there. But
that was great.
Make it big time where you're at. But I love where we're at here. I love the small town, and it's a different animal because you get some of those kids where my walk-ons at D2 level compared to a D1 walk-on is a little different. So my introductory phase and those type of things are a little more challenging too. But it's all going to be about the same wherever you go. You got to develop your kids and get them ready and buy into the program. So.
Well, having been at a lot of different levels, I mean that every level has its trials and its tribulations and positives and negatives, and ultimately, just finding the time to really dig into where you're at and make it the big time where you're at, and find ways to make it a job that you don't want to leave, instead of always looking for the next job. I think is an important lesson in the maturation of a strength coach, and you've done that obviously and continue to do so. You're in the middle of camp, starting game week here. I know you're busy. We always end the show with some resources here. So tell us the best piece of coaching advice you ever received.
And this is one I got from a conference that I was at. Al Vermeil spoke on one of the panels, and I feel like they asked all these master strength coaches what are your top 3 lifts? Somebody got up and asked that question. And people were saying bench, squat, or not bench, mostly squat and clean and power clean, those type of things. Coach Vermeil talked about running, being able to run and be an athlete. And I think that is one thing that we kind of overlook as strength coaches, especially at a lower level where we don't have that, kind of speed on field type coach where you might have at a Division I level. But I think, you've all had that kid in high school that you trained with that was always a great bencher, great squatter, but couldn't play football worth a lick. So my best advice is when he said, his top thing is to make sure athletes can run because, I don't think it's always, sometimes you got to figure out when you got to push in the weight room and when you got to cut back. So like I'm saying, when we had some of our injuries early on in my career, we decided to get on the field and do a lot of agility stuff and change of direction type movement stuff. But a lot of our Florida kids that come in haven't lifted a lick in their life, and all they do is field work, and they have the speed and they have some explosive power still from just some of the things they're doing on the field. So that's one thing I would say is probably my biggest piece of advice is make sure you just have an athlete that can move and run and change directions because, we all have those animals in the weight room, but they're not always transferring over.
Absolutely. What about a book, app, and website recommendation?
Book-wise, I have a book called The Fred Factor. It's just it's an easy read. I'm not much of a reader. I'm more of an article guy where I can get on and learn some stuff really quick. but the Fred factor talks about it's more of a mailman that goes above and beyond at his job, and similar to talking about, staking that flag and staying in one spot in the big time where you are. This guy takes pride in what he does, and it talks about all these different types of Fred. One of my friends, Jeff Smith, sent that to us a while back. Me and my wife will read while we're traveling in the car, and that was a big one because some of those things that go beyond coaching. As a strength coach, you know how it is. We're a psychiatrist. We're everything to these kids because I'm not dictating whether they play or not. They'll come in and talk to us about personal issues. So some of those things it kind of talks about. Very easy read, but I really like that book. Website. I like YouTube and getting on and watching TED Talks. We started a couple years ago where it's not always coaching-based stuff, but it kind of gives you an outlook on life and thinking differently about certain things. But you can find different topics for those. An app that we're currently using, we use Rack Performance for not just the timing system, we do it for data entry. And that one has really been beneficial to us to track our athletes from year to year, and we started that data entry stuff there.
What was it called again?
Rack Performance.
RACK?
Mm-hmm. So it's they're out of Kansas City, but we started working with them just to, I have all these Excel sheets of all our previous years where we kind of want to track our kids a little better, where when I have individual meetings with our kids, I can pull up and it shows a bar graph or, a line of, okay, we're still making gains. What do we need to change if we're losing certain spots? But those ones are ones that I've really gained some benefit off of here recently, at least.
Well, that's great, man. Well, this has been fantastic, and there's obviously it's obvious to me why there's been success at Northwest Missouri State and within your program and helping coaches move on. And I think it's obvious to to everybody that's listening that you pour in to both your athletes and your coaches. Man, I appreciate you coming on the show, man.
I appreciate you having me. Good stuff.
That's it for this episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk. Thanks to this week's guest as well as our sponsors for bringing this episode to you for free. Make sure to check out ronmckeefery.com where you can join our mailing list, find the show notes, including all the links and resources mentioned, and information about Coach McKeefery's other products. While you are there, please join Coach McKeefery in the comments section thanking our guest for sharing. If you haven't subscribed to Iron Game Chalk Talk on YouTube or iTunes yet, make sure to do so. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome. Coach McKeefery can be found on Twitter at @RMcKeefery, on Facebook and YouTube at /Ron.McKeefery. That's it for this week. Be sure to check back next week for another great episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk.